The mahogany dining table, once a symbol of family unity, had become my personal battleground. 7 years. 7 years of Sunday dinners punctuated by barely veiled insults, strained silences, and the constant, prickling awareness that I was not wanted. "Oh, Carolyn, you just don't understand," Eleanor would sigh, twirling a strand of her perfectly highlighted hair. "It's a generational thing. This, after I had suggested a family game night, a tradition from my own childhood. Julian, Eleanor's fiancé, would chuckle softly, a sound that grated on my nerves like nails on a chalkboard. "She means, you know, we're just different," he'd add, his eyes flickering towards Marcus and Amy, my other two stepchildren, for affirmation. They'd offer tight-lipped smiles in return, a silent chorus of agreement. The pattern was always the same. I'd try to engage, to bridge the chasm that seemed to widen with each passing week. "I thought we could all go apple-picking next weekend," I offered one crisp autumn evening, placing a steaming apple pie on the table. "The orchard down the road has a festival." Marcus snorted. "Apple-picking? Seriously?" He scoffed, pushing his plate away. "That's something kids do." Amy, ever the echo, chimed in, "Yeah, we're a little old for hayrides and petting zoos, Carolyn." The sting of their words was a familiar ache. I tried different tactics, tailoring my suggestions to their individual interests. A museum exhibit for Amy, a new golf club for Marcus, tickets to the symphony for Eleanor and Julian. Each attempt met with the same dismissive air, the same thinly veiled contempt. "Oh, the symphony," Eleanor would say, her voice dripping with exaggerated sweetness. "How lovely! But Julian and I already have plans." Those plans, I often discovered later, involved anything but high culture. A pub crawl, a concert featuring a band I'd never heard of, a weekend getaway to some trendy beach town. Anything, it seemed, to avoid spending time with me. Dinner conversations became a minefield. I learned to tread carefully, offering bland observations about the weather, the news, anything to avoid sparking their disdain. That storm last night was something else. I'd venture cautiously. "The power went out for hours." "Oh, did it?" Eleanor would reply, not even bothering to look up from her phone. "We didn't even notice." The unspoken message hung heavy in the air. "Your experiences, your concerns, are irrelevant to us." Birthdays and holidays were the worst. I'd spend weeks planning, shopping for thoughtful gifts, decorating the house to create a festive atmosphere. My efforts were met with indifference, at best. "Another cashmere sweater," Marcus would sigh dramatically, holding up the carefully chosen gift. "Really, Caroline, you shouldn't have." He'd toss it aside, as if it were a cheap trinket. Amy, meanwhile, would open her gift, a beautifully illustrated art book, with a barely concealed yawn. "Thanks," she'd mumble, already reaching for her phone. One Christmas Eve, I decided to break with tradition and suggest a new activity. I began hesitantly. "Maybe we could all go caroling this year. It's supposed to snow, and it could be fun." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Eleanor spoke, her voice laced with icy amusement. "Caroling? Are you serious? Carolyn, that's something people did, like, 100 years ago. It's embarrassing." "Julian, predictably agreed. Yeah, we're not really the caroling type, he said, smirking, unless it involves a karaoke bar and a lot of tequila. The years blurred into a monotonous cycle of strained dinners, rejected gestures, and thinly veiled insults. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a constant reminder of their father's second, and in their eyes, clearly inferior choice. I tried to understand their animosity, to find some logical explanation for their relentless cruelty. Was it jealousy, resentment, a lingering loyalty to their deceased mother? I never found a satisfactory answer. The only solace I found was in my garden. Amidst the vibrant blooms and fragrant herbs, I could escape the suffocating atmosphere of the house and find a moment of peace. I nurtured my plants with the same care and attention I longed to bestow upon my stepchildren, and as I watched them flourish, a quiet resolve began to take root within me, a seed of defiance, planted deep within the fertile ground of my wounded pride. I started to realize that the only way to survive this emotional wasteland was to cultivate my own strength, my own resilience, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to bloom again, even in the shadow of their disdain. Their indifference was a slow burn, a constant erosion of my spirit. But like the hardy perennials that thrived in my garden, I knew I had the capacity to endure, and I suspected, deep down, that my time to blossom would come. Rain lashed against the coffee shop window, mirroring the storm inside me. Just hours ago, Eleanor and Julian, along with Marcus and Amy, had informed me, with barely concealed glee, that they were selling the house. It's just too big for one person, Carolyn, Eleanor had said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We've decided it's best for everyone. I stirred my lukewarm latte, the bitter taste a grim reflection of my situation. The house, our house, filled with memories of happier times with my late husband, Richard. Now, they were snatching it away, leaving me adrift. I could barely meet the barista's kind eyes when she asked, "Anything else, ma'am?" I shook my head, clutching my purse. Where would I go? What would I do? My savings were modest, barely enough to cover a few months' rent in a cramped apartment. Richard had always assured me I'd be taken care of, but his sudden illness had left no time for proper planning. He trusted his children. Clearly, that had been a mistake. A gentle cough interrupted my spiraling thoughts. A man slightly older than me, with kind eyes and a warm smile, gestured to the empty chair opposite mine. "Do you mind?" he asked. I hesitated. Normally I would have declined, but the loneliness pressing in on me was suffocating. "Please," I managed, forcing a small smile. He introduced himself as David. "Just moved here," he explained, settling into the chair. "Bit overwhelming, trying to navigate a new city." He ordered a black coffee, and we fell into easy conversation, discussing the local sights and the surprisingly unpredictable weather. He mentioned he was a widower, with 3 children of his own, all grown and living elsewhere. "They visit often, though," he said, a flicker of pride in his voice. "Family is everything." His words stung. Family. I had thought Richard's children were my family too, at least in some small way. I had tried, over the years, to be a good stepmother. I supported their dreams, celebrated their achievements, and offered a listening ear during their struggles. but it had never been enough. They always saw me as an outsider, an interloper. My Eleanor is getting married next spring, I found myself saying, the words slipping out before I could stop them. David's face lit up. Congratulations. That's wonderful news. I forced a smile, the bitterness rising in my throat. Wonderful for Eleanor, perhaps. For me, it was just another reminder of my isolation. I'm sorry, David said softly, sensing my shift in mood. I didn't mean to pry. I shook my head. It's complicated, I admitted, the word a vast understatement. I found myself telling him about Richard, about the happy years we had shared, and about the growing chasm between me and his children. I didn't go into the details of their cruelty, the subtle jabs and veiled insults that had become a constant presence in my life. I simply said that they wanted me out of the house. David listened patiently, his kind eyes filled with understanding. He didn't offer platitudes or easy solutions. He simply listened, a quiet presence in the midst of my storm. As the rain outside began to subside, so too did the turmoil within me. Talking to David, a stranger, had offered a strange comfort. It was a small connection in a world that suddenly felt vast and empty. He finished his coffee and stood up to leave. It was lovely meeting you, Carolyn, he said, extending his hand. I hope things get better for you. I shook his hand, surprised by the warmth of his touch. Thank you, David, I replied. It was nice meeting you too, he smiled. Perhaps we'll run into each other again. He left a small tip on the table and headed towards the door, pausing briefly to look back. Take care of yourself, Carolyn, he said softly, and then he was gone. I watched him go, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Maybe things weren't as bleak as they seemed. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way out of this darkness. I had a feeling I would see David again, and I had a feeling that things were about to change. I finished my latte, the bitterness now replaced by a strange sense of anticipation. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of sunlight peeked through the clouds. I gathered my things and stepped out into the crisp, clean air, a new resolve hardening within me. They wanted me out of the house. They wanted me gone. We'll see about that. I had a plan forming, a seed of an idea taking root in the fertile ground of my resentment. It wouldn't be easy, but I was no longer the timid, grieving widow they thought they could push around. I was about to become something else entirely. Rain lashed against the windows of David's study, mirroring the storm raging inside me. You're nothing but a gold digger, Eleanor had spat at me, her voice dripping with contempt. Just hours after David's funeral, now that Dad's gone, you have no claim to this house. I sat numbly, clutching a threadbare throw, the chill seeping deep into my bones. This house, where I'd poured years of my life caring for David, tending to his every need, now felt like a hostile territory. Julian, Eleanor's fiancé, stood beside her, a smug look plastered on his face. We've been over this, Carolyn, he said, his tone condescending. You're welcome to stay until we sort out this state, but then you'll need to find other arrangements. Other arrangements, I echoed faintly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I had nowhere to go. David and I had met later in life, after my own career had ended, and my savings were meager. I had devoted myself entirely to him, to us. never imagining a future where us didn't include him. I don't understand. I managed, my voice trembling. David always assured me. Eleanor cut me off, her voice sharp. Dad wasn't thinking clearly in his last few months. He wouldn't have wanted you to be a burden on us. A burden. The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Had I become a burden? I glanced around the study, at the bookshelves lined with David's treasured volumes, the antique desk where he'd spent countless hours working, the worn leather armchair where he'd read to me in the evenings. This wasn't just his house. It was our house. We'd built a life here, a life filled with quiet moments of joy and shared laughter. Perhaps, Julian interjected smoothly, we could help you find a suitable retirement community, somewhere comfortable. He stressed the last word, a veiled insult hidden beneath a veneer of politeness. I knew what he meant. Somewhere small, somewhere cheap, somewhere out of sight and out of mind, somewhere far away from their inheritance. The thought of being shuffled off to some sterile and personal facility sent a shiver down my spine. I need some time to think, I finally said, my voice barely above a whisper. I stood up, the throw slipping from my shoulders. Eleanor didn't bother to pick it up. I felt their eyes boring into my back as I walked out of the study, each step heavier than the last. I wandered aimlessly through the house, the familiar rooms now imbued with a chilling emptiness, the photographs on the mantelpiece, chronicling years of family gatherings and holidays, now felt like mocking reminders of a happiness that had vanished. I found myself in David's bedroom, the air still thick with the scent of his aftershave. I sank onto the edge of the bed, the weight of my grief pressing down on me like a physical force. How had my life come to this? I'd lost my husband, my home, and now, it seemed, my dignity. Tears streamed down my face, hot and bitter. I felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of sorrow and resentment. Eleanor and Julian's callous words echoed in my ears, fueling a growing ember of anger within me. I opened David's bedside drawer, my fingers brushing against a small, velvet-lined box. It was the box containing his watch, a cherished heirloom passed down from his grandfather. He had always intended to give it to Eleanor, a symbol of his love and legacy. I picked up the box, the cool metal a stark contrast to the burning anger in my chest. As I held it, a strange calm settled over me. The tears stopped, replaced by a steely resolve. They wanted me gone. Did they? They wanted to erase me from their lives, to treat me as if I were nothing. They had underestimated me. I closed the drawer, the box remaining in my hand. A plan began to form in my mind, a seed of an idea taking root in the fertile ground of my despair. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them strip me of everything I held dear. I wouldn't let them forget me. I would find a way to fight back, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to make them regret the day they ever tried to push me aside. The rain continued to beat against the windows, but inside, the storm was beginning to subside. It was being replaced by something else, something colder, something sharper, something that whispered of a reckoning to come. I walked to the window, looking out at the storm-tossed trees. I had nothing left to lose, and that, I realized, was a powerful thing. I had a secret weapon, a knowledge they didn't possess. David had confided in me about his finances, about the true extent of his wealth, information he hadn't shared with his children. He'd trusted me completely, and I knew he would want me to be taken care of. Eleanor and Julian thought they knew the value of this estate, the limits of their inheritance. They were wrong, so very wrong. A small, almost imperceptible smile played on my lips. They thought they were pushing me out into the cold. They had no idea what awaited them. The game, I realized, was far from over. It was just beginning. Rain lashed against the window pane, mirroring the chill that had settled deep in my bones. It had been 5 years since Robert's passing, 5 years of navigating this house, this family, as an outsider looking in, 5 years of trying and failing to bridge the chasm that separated me from his children. I remember, shortly after the funeral, attempting to engage Eleanor in a conversation about her wedding plans. "Eleanor, dear," I'd started, "have you and Julian set a date yet?" She barely glanced up from her phone. "It's none of your concern," she'd muttered, the words sharp as shards of glass. That set the tone. Birthdays passed unmarked, holidays observed in strained silence. My attempts at conversation were met with curt replies or outright ignored. I offered to help with Eleanor's wedding preparations, envisioning myself bustling around, a supportive mother figure, but was met with a frosty, "We have everything under control." The message was clear. I wasn't needed. I wasn't wanted. I tried to find my place, carving out a routine in the quiet emptiness of the house. The garden became my solace, a place where I could lose myself in the rhythm of planting and pruning. I volunteered at the local library, surrounding myself with the comforting silence of books, the stories within their pages, welcome distraction from the silent treatment I received at home. I even took up pottery, the feel of cool clay in my hands a grounding force in a world that felt increasingly unsteady. One evening, I found Marcus in the kitchen, rummaging through the fridge. "Marcus," I ventured, "I was thinking of making a lasagna tomorrow. Your father's recipe." He grabbed a carton of milk, not even bothering to look at me. "Don't bother," he mumbled. "I'm going out." He slammed the fridge door shut, the sound echoing the door he'd slammed shut on any kind of relationship with me. Amy was no different. I'd find her curled up on the sofa, lost in the glow of her laptop, headphones blocking out the world, and me, my attempts to engage her in conversation, to ask about her studies, were met with the same disinterest as her siblings. "Busy," she'd say, not even bothering to remove her headphones. The word hung in the air, a blunt dismissal of my presence, my existence. The sting of their rejection was a constant ache. I'd lie awake at night, listening to the rain drum against the window, the sound amplifying the emptiness in the house, the emptiness in my heart. Robert had loved these children, and I, foolishly, had believed I could love them too, could become a part of their lives. Now, I felt like a ghost in my own home, a shadow flitting through the halls, unseen, unheard. I was a stranger in the house Robert and I had built together, a house filled with memories that were now tainted with bitterness. I began to withdraw, retreating further into myself. Meals were eaten alone, in the silence of the dining room, the empty chairs a stark reminder of my isolation. I stopped trying to initiate conversations, accepting the cold indifference that had become the norm. The silence in the house was deafening. broken only by the occasional curt exchange or the slamming of a door. Even the garden, once my refuge, offered little solace. The vibrant blooms seemed to mock my own wilting spirit, the cheerful chirping of birds a jarring contrast to the oppressive silence within the house. One afternoon, while sorting through some old photographs, I came across a picture of Robert and me, taken shortly after we were married. We were standing on the beach, our arms wrapped around each other, our faces radiant with happiness. Looking at that picture, a wave of grief washed over me, so intense it almost knocked me off my feet. I sank to the floor, clutching the photograph to my chest, tears streaming down my face. It wasn't just grief for Robert that I felt, but a profound sense of loss for the life I had envisioned, the family I had hoped to build. I had given up everything to be with Robert, to be a part of his family, and what had I gained? Nothing but loneliness and rejection. As the tears subsided, a new feeling began to stir within me, a feeling I hadn't recognized before. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was something colder, harder. Resolve. I wiped my eyes, carefully placed the photograph back in the album, and stood up. I looked around the room, at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, the books on the shelves. This was my house too. Robert had wanted me to have it, had made sure of it in his will, and I wasn't going to let his children, who had never shown me an ounce of respect or affection, drive me out. The rain continued to beat against the windows, but the sound no longer felt oppressive. It felt like a cleansing, a washing away of the old, the weak. Something had shifted within me. I was still hurting, still grieving, but I was no longer lost. I had a purpose now. I would not be broken. I would survive, and maybe, just maybe, I would thrive. There was a flicker of something in my eyes, a glint of steel beneath the sadness. They wanted a fight. They would get one. They had underestimated me for far too long. The dust motes danced in the afternoon sunbeams slanting through the living room windows, illuminating the very furniture my stepchildren now wanted to sell from under me. "It's just practical," Carolyn, Eleanor said, twisting her engagement ring, a nervous habit I'd noticed blossoming since Julian had proposed. "A smaller place would be easier for you to manage, easier for them to wash their hands of me." I thought bitterly. This house is too big for one person. Marcus, always the blunt one, added, not even bothering to look up from his phone. Amy, ever the peacemaker or so she liked to portray herself, chimed in with a saccharine, "We just want what's best for you, Carolyn." "What's best for me?" I replied calmly, my voice steadier than I felt, "is to stay in the home David and I built together. My late husband, their father, had adored this house. Every room held a memory, every photograph a story. The thought of strangers dismantling our life, piece by piece, was unbearable." "I appreciate your concern," I continued, my gaze sweeping over their faces, each one a mask of thinly veiled impatience. "But this house is my home. I won't be selling it." Julian, silent until now, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could discuss this later, Eleanor," he suggested, his hand resting briefly on her arm. She shrugged him off, her eyes fixed on me. "No, Julian, we need to settle this now." She turned back to me, her expression hardening. "Look, Carolyn," she began, her voice laced with a hint of steel, We know Dad left you well provided for. You could easily find a lovely condo, something more suited to your needs. Their true motives hung in the air, thick and suffocating, like the humid summer air before a storm. They saw me as an obstacle, a roadblock to their inheritance. They wanted me gone, out of the house, out of their lives, and they thinly disguised their greed with feigned concern. "I'm not going anywhere," I stated firmly, meeting Eleanor's gaze head-on. "This is my home." A flicker of annoyance crossed Eleanor's face. "But the upkeep, Carolyn. It's a burden, surely. Think of the gardening, the cleaning." She trailed off, her voice dripping with condescension. "We're only thinking of you." Marcus finally looked up from his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. "Yeah, Carolyn, we wouldn't want you to overexert yourself." Their thinly veiled insults, their blatant disregard for my feelings, fueled a fire within me. A quiet resolve hardened my spine. I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them bully me into leaving. I had a plan, a seed of an idea that had been germinating in my mind since David's passing. It was risky, audacious, but the potential reward satisfaction of watching their faces crumble was worth the gamble. "I understand your concerns," I said, my voice smooth and even, betraying none of the turmoil within. "Perhaps we should all take some time to think things over." I stood up, signaling the end of the discussion. "I have some errands to run." As I walked toward the door, Eleanor called out, "Carolyn, wait." I paused, turning to face her. We want what's best for everyone," she stammered, her voice losing its earlier confidence. "I'm sure you do, dear," I replied, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. "I'm sure you do." I left them there, stewing in their own frustration, unaware of the storm brewing on the horizon. They thought they had me cornered, that they held all the cards. They had no idea what I had in store for them. They had no idea about the documents locked away in my safe, the carefully crafted plan that would turn their world upside down. They wanted this house. They would get it, but not in the way they expected. Not at all. The roast was dry, much like the conversation. Eleanor and Julian sat across from me, their faces tight with barely concealed animosity. "This house is too big for you, Carolyn," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "It was Mom's house, not yours. You should really think about selling." Julian nodded in agreement, a smug look playing on his lips. "Downsizing would be sensible," he added, "especially given your circumstances." "My circumstances? Widowed, yes, alone, certainly feeling it, but not defeated, not by a long shot. I'm comfortable here," I replied calmly, my fork scraping against the china. "This is my home." Eleanor scoffed. "It's practically falling apart," she countered, waving a hand dismissively. "The upkeep must be a fortune." "Sell it, Carolyn. You'll be better off." I took a sip of water, letting their words wash over me. This wasn't the first time they'd suggested I sell. In fact, they'd been increasingly insistent since David's passing. They saw dollar signs, a quick inheritance. They saw me as an obstacle. They didn't see the years I'd spent caring for their father, managing this household, nurturing their family. They didn't see the love I still held for David, the memories woven into the very fabric of this home. All they saw was an asset to be liquidated. "I'm not selling," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. This house holds a lot of memories for me. I looked directly at Eleanor. Memories of your father. Memories of all of us together. Eleanor rolled her eyes. Sentimental value doesn't pay the bills. Carolyn, be practical. Julian patted her hand condescendingly. Your stepmother just needs time to adjust, darling. It's a big decision. He smiled at me, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We just want what's best for you, Carolyn. What they wanted was this house, and everything in it. They wanted me gone, but they wouldn't get it. Not like this. Not on their terms. Over the past few weeks, a plan had been forming in my mind, a quiet seed of defiance taking root. David had always trusted me implicitly, not only with his heart, but with his finances. He'd shared everything with me, every detail of his investments, his properties, his carefully crafted will, and within that will, within the complex web of trusts and stipulations, lay the key to my revenge. I appreciate your concern, I said, my voice steady, but I've made up my mind. I stood up, gathering my purse. I have an appointment with my financial advisor tomorrow. He's going over some options with me. Eleanor exchanged a look with Julian, a flicker of unease in her eyes. Options? She asked. Yes, I said, smiling faintly. Options. David was a thorough man. He made sure I was taken care of in every possible scenario. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. He always looked after his family. I turned to leave, the image of their perplexed faces a small victory. As I drove home, the tension of the dinner began to dissipate, replaced by a cool sense of purpose. David had taught me a lot about finances, about investments, about securing a future. He'd also taught me, unintentionally perhaps, about the importance of protecting oneself, of being prepared for any eventuality. He wouldn't have wanted me to be bullied, to be pushed aside. He would have wanted me to fight, and fight I would. My appointment tomorrow wasn't with a financial advisor. It was with a lawyer, a specialist in estate planning, someone who could help me unravel the intricacies of David's will and unlock the full extent of my power, the power they so clearly underestimated. They wanted this house. They wanted me gone. They had no idea what they were up against. They had no idea what was coming. The chill from the evening air seeped into David's living room, mirroring the coldness I felt inside. I'm sorry, Carolyn, David said, his voice strained, but Eleanor and Julian insist they need the space. They're planning to start a family soon. I nodded, my throat tight. Of course they do, I managed, picking at a loose thread on the sofa cushion. It was a worn, familiar piece of furniture, a silent witness to years of family gatherings, both joyful and strained. This time, the strain was a tight knot in my stomach, pulling me under. We've offered to help you find a smaller place, Eleanor chimed in, her tone saccharine, something more manageable. Julian, ever the shadow, nodded in agreement. Yes, somewhere cozy. Their words, coated in false concern, stung more than any outright insult. I looked around the room, at the family photos on the mantelpiece, the paintings David and I had chosen together. This wasn't just a house. It was my home filled with memories. Now, they were trying to erase me piece by piece. I appreciate the offer, I replied, forcing a smile, but I'm not ready to make any decisions yet. Eleanor's smile faltered. But the house is too big for you now, isn't it? And with the upkeep she trailed off, exchanging a look with Julian. It is a lot to handle, David agreed, looking at me with a mixture of pity and something else I couldn't quite decipher. Was it guilt? Or was I just projecting? I'll manage, I said firmly, rising to my feet. I need some air. I stepped out onto the patio, the cool night air welcome balm on my burning cheeks. Looking back at the warm glow emanating from the living room window, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. This charade had been going on for weeks, ever since David's passing. First, subtle hints about downsizing, then increasingly pointed suggestions. Now, this orchestrated performance. As I stood there, a single thought pierced through the fog of grief and anger. They wanted me gone. They wanted this house. David's house. Our house. They thought I was a fragile, grieving widow, easily manipulated. They were wrong. I went back inside, plastered a calm smile on my face, and rejoined the conversation. Actually, I said, my voice steady, I've been thinking. I've always wanted to travel. Perhaps a long trip is exactly what I need right now. Eleanor and Julian exchanged bewildered glances. Travel, Eleanor repeated, her voice laced with suspicion. Yes, I continued, my smile widening. I was thinking of a cruise. Several months, maybe even a year. It would give me time to process everything. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. And while I'm gone, perhaps you could oversee the house for me, Eleanor. Make sure everything is in order. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Of course, Carolyn. We'd be happy to. Julian, ever quick to follow her lead, chimed in, absolutely. Consider it done. I hid a smile. They were so eager, so blinded by their greed, they hadn't even considered the implications. Over the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I booked the cruise, a luxurious year-long voyage around the world, and made arrangements for my departure. Eleanor and Julian, barely containing their excitement, practically moved in. They started redecorating, making plans, acting as if the house were already theirs. The day I was supposed to leave, I stood at the front door, suitcase in hand, watching as Eleanor and Julian fussed over the last of my belongings. Have a wonderful trip, Carolyn, Eleanor chirped, barely able to meet my eyes. Send us a postcard, Julian added, a smug grin plastered on his face. I smiled. I will, I promised. And I'll be in touch. As the taxi pulled away, I watched them through the rearview mirror, their silhouettes framed in the doorway. They were already celebrating, no doubt toasting their victory. Little did they know, their celebration was premature. The cruise was real, the tickets booked, the itinerary planned. But my destination wasn't some far-off tropical island. It was a lawyer's office, downtown. While they were busy making themselves comfortable in my house, I was busy making sure they wouldn't be there for long. David and I had updated our wills a few years prior, a quiet decision made during a peaceful Sunday afternoon. We'd discussed the possibility of his children contesting the will, their subtle jabs and thinly veiled resentment always simmering beneath the surface. We'd taken precautions. The will stipulated that in the event of David's death, the house would remain mine for the duration of my lifetime. Upon my death, it would be divided equally among his children. However, A codicil, added later and kept secret, outlined a specific clause. Any attempt to force me from the house, any action taken to coerce or manipulate me into relinquishing my ownership would result in immediate forfeiture of their inheritance. The house, in that event, would go to a charity David had long supported. My lawyer, a shrewd woman with a steely gaze, had been delighted with my plan. "They've walked right into your trap, Carolyn," she'd said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "Let them enjoy their ill-gotten gains for a little while. The longer they stay, the sweeter the fall." Now, as I sat in the back of the taxi, heading not to the cruise terminal, but to my lawyer's office to finalize the paperwork, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The chill in the air was gone, replaced by a warmth that spread from my chest to my fingertips. My revenge wouldn't be loud or dramatic. It wouldn't be a fiery confrontation or a public spectacle. It would be quiet, calculated, and devastatingly effective. They wanted me out of the house. They got more than they bargained for. The crisp autumn air nipped at my face as I walked down the bustling street, a faint smile playing on my lips. "I told you she wouldn't last a week." I heard Eleanor's sharp voice behind me. "Once Julian and I are married, this whole estate, including that ridiculous little cottage she's clinging to, is ours." My smile widened. They were so close, so sure of themselves. "I can't wait to redecorate," Eleanor continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "That awful chintz furniture has got to go." I paused by a storefront, pretending to admire a display, letting their words wash over me. "And imagine," Julian chuckled, "hosting Christmas dinner here, as the rightful owners." My heart ached, a phantom pang for the holidays we used to share, before their father's passing warped everything. I turned, facing them, my expression carefully neutral. "Eleanor, Julian," I said calmly. They stopped, surprise flickering across their faces. "I overheard your plans for the estate." Eleanor scoffed. "Overheard? You were practically eavesdropping." "Carolyn, perhaps," I conceded, "but it saved me the trouble of a formal announcement." Their confusion was palpable. Good. Let them stew for a moment. I reached into my bag, pulling out a thick envelope. "I believe this belongs to you, Eleanor." She snatched it, tearing it open with a mixture of impatience and suspicion. Inside was a copy of my late husband's will, annotated with bright yellow sticky notes. Eleanor scanned the document, her face paling with each passing second. Julian peered over her shoulder, his jaw dropping. What is this?" Eleanor stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "It's quite straightforward, actually," I explained, my voice even and steady. "Your father, in his infinite wisdom, foresaw certain contingencies." I pointed to a highlighted clause. "This section clearly states that this estate, in its entirety, is bequeathed to home." Eleanor's eyes widened. But that's not possible." "It is, however, legally binding," I confirmed, meeting her gaze. "And these," I continued, producing another set of documents, "are the deeds to the properties your father gifted to me during our marriage, including the very cottage you so generously offered me." Julian's face was ashen. "I knew all along," he choked out. "Of course," I replied smoothly. "I was, after all, your father's wife. He confided in me. He trusted me. Unlike some, Eleanor's hands trembled, the wool fluttering to the ground. "This isn't fair," she cried, her voice rising in pitch. "Fair," I echoed, a hint of steel entering my voice. "You spent yours treating me with barely veiled contempt, whispering behind my back, wishing me gone. You even wish me dead, Eleanor, at your father's memorial dinner, no less. And now you're talking about fairness." I let the silence hang in the air, thick and heavy with their stunned realization. "The cottage, as you call it," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "is actually a charming seaside villa in the south of France. I'm leaving for the winter. I suggest you find alternative accommodations." I retrieved the fallen wool, tucking it back into my bag. "Oh, and Eleanor," I added as an afterthought, "the furniture stays." I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there, mouths agape, the reality of their situation finally sinking in. The autumn sun felt warm on my face, a stark contrast to the icy chill I had felt for so long. I had played the long game, and I had won. As I hailed a cab, I allowed myself a small, private smile. This wasn't just about the house or the money. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, my peace. This was about justice. And as the cab pulled away, I glanced back one last time, not at them, but at the grand estate, the house that had been a cage for so long. Now, it was theirs to deal with, a constant reminder of their greed and their folly. And somewhere, in a sun-drenched villa overlooking the Mediterranean, I would be raising a glass to my newfound freedom, finally at peace.